Welcome to Social Work Live at the Columbia School of Social Work. My name is Michael Friedman, and each week we interview a member, and this week two members, of our community to discuss what's going on in the world of social work. We will talk for about 15 minutes, and then we'll start to take questions. And you can submit your questions by going to the comments section of the Facebook page that you're on, and we'll pick up the questions from there. Just one other thing, if you're having difficulty hearing during this program, try turning up the volume on your Facebook page and on your computer. Hopefully that will solve the problem if it happens. So we have two very interesting guests today. Neeraj Kaushal has been with us before. She's an economist and a professor here at Columbia School of Social Work, an eminent background, and a new book which is out now. It's called Blaming Immigrants, Nationalism, and the Economics of the Global Movement, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. And Bethany Miller, who I have tremendous admiration for, she's a second-year student here at Columbia who's been around, done a lot before becoming a student at Columbia, and she's taking her winter vacation and going down to the border to try to help people who are stuck in that caravan at the border. So we're going to have a conversation about immigration and the caravan and take it from there. I just want to start by talking about your book a little bit. It's got a great title, Blaming Immigrants. You want to just say a word about it and how people can get it?
Well, I have received a lot of emails since we last spoke at on this Facebook interview. People wanted to know where to get the book. It's now available on Amazon as well as Columbia University Press website. At Columbia University Press website, you can get a 30% discount with a CUP30 code.
Okay, so go to the Columbia University Press and make sure you get your discount, but buy the book. It's out in hardcover and in paperback, and it's more than a little cheaper in paperback than it is in hardcover. So yeah. you may want to go that route. So, Neeraj, last time that we talked, you commented briefly about thinking that the Trump, I don't know if it's a metaphor or just rhetoric, but he calls this caravan that's now in Mexico an invasion. Mm-hmm. And you have some reservations about seeing it that way. Maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah, so I think there are two things that we must remember. One is that the number of migrants at the border, about 6,000 or 7,000 of them, is a drop in the number of immigrants, permanent as well as temporary, that the United States absorbs every year, which is about 2.5 million or more. And the second thing that we must remember, when we use the word invasion, it actually creates the impression that the caravan or the migrants are a security threat. And that sends a fear in the minds of the public, that the caravans they are coming. And in fact, at that time, President Trump even said that among the migrants are people from the Middle East. Now, there's nothing that we've heard or seen so far to suggest that his statement is correct. What all this does is that it creates fear in the mind of the people, and they think that migrants are, invading the country, and that creates anger towards migrants.
It also, of course, justifies calling out the Army and treating this as if it's a war situation rather than a long-term policy issue in the United States, which is how to deal with immigration and the desire of people to come to this country because they are looking for better lives for themselves. So.
Yeah, so, we have to think of a few things. One is that this is not the first caravan that we've received, nor would this be the last. In the last 6-7 years, many groups of migrants, the term we use to describe them is caravan, have come to the U.S. border. Many of them, and what happens is that they all seek asylum. A very small percentage, less than 20% of them get asylum, and now it seems that the numbers are going to be even less. The second thing that we should remember is that the U.S. economy needs migrants. The irony is that we, sector after sector, industry after industry in the U.S. is reporting labor shortages. Throughout the country, across the country, there are labor shortages. In the past, whenever we had such labor shortages, especially labor shortages for blue-collar workers, we had a lot of immigrants, undocumented immigrants in particular, coming from Mexico. Now with deportation, increased enforcement, and also changes in demographics in Mexico have changed things. Mexicans' undocumented immigration has declined.
Let me just interrupt here. I want to go back because I don't fully understand what asylum means, the legalities around that. I mean, I understand that there's a law in the United States that says that people can seek asylum, but I'm not quite sure what that means and the conditions under which it's granted. Maybe you could elaborate on that.
Well, you cannot seek asylum on economic conditions. You can seek asylum if there is danger to your security, if there is a political persecution in the country of origin. So on those grounds you can seek asylum, but you cannot seek asylum on grounds of economic insecurity.
And risk of violence, you said if there's political disruption in the country that you're coming from, you can seek asylum. We have a number of people now coming from Central America saying that they're at risk of gang violence or drug-related violence, and that they're leaving to escape terrible conditions of that kind.
Those are grounds for asylum. You can seek asylum on those grounds, but what I was referring to was 20%. We've seen that the rate of people who can get asylum is less than 20% from people from Central America.
What happens to those people, the 80%? What happens
The
to them?
80%, many of them, some of them go back, some of them decide to stay in Mexico, but many of them get into the clutches of smugglers, coyotes, who charge them and they enter the United States illegally. So,
Or die trying.
Or die trying, yes. A lot of them. And then the thing is, earlier things were different. Now, if you enter the country illegally, there's a high chance of you getting deported. So one thing that we need to think of a long-term solution to the caravans that are coming from Central America. This is not the first, as I said. This would not be the last. We've had in the last 6-7 years many caravans coming in, and these are people who are escaping from poverty, from gang violence, from a civil war going on in those countries.
So part of the point that you were making when I interrupted you was that it's to America's economic advantage to have immigrants coming in. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit? I know you said something about it already. But
yeah, so I think just before that, let me finish my previous thought, which was that we need to think of a long-term solution. Ours is a country of immigrants. You know, the whole world looks at us for immigration policy. So we need to think of a solution to divert these caravans to the legal routes. Inform them that asylum is not a good option. They need to look for channels, legal channels in their country of origin. Go to the consulate office. The NGOs that work with them need to inform them. And we here, advocates of immigrants, should actually go towards creating an immigration policy that creates more visas for people from Central America. And why I think that's a positive thing for the United States is that it's not just that we have a scarcity of professionals. We have a scarcity of blue-collar workers. In the past, we were able to get them from Mexico. Now we are not able to get them from Mexico. And we need to look for people who could come. We need workers. So workers are a positive. Migrants, if given the right opportunities, they can be a positive news both for the country that's receiving them as well as for the country, for migrants themselves.
So for those of us who work on the issue of aging, as you know, I'm engaged with one of the major concerns going forward is with the growth of the aging population in the United States and the proportional decline of a working age population. Immigration looks as if it's one of the only viable solutions to having the workers that we will need, particularly in the helping workforce. And if you look at the lower level healthcare workers in the United States today, who are they? They're largely people who are first generation in the United States, whether documented or undocumented. So we have a vast need, is your point, for these people to come in, and we should open the doors much further than they've been opened.
Like you were saying earlier, when we were having this conversation, that even Japan, because of the demographic challenges that it's facing, is now thinking of opening its doors to basically blue-collar workers, people who can provide for the care for their elderly, people who can work in construction, who can work in healthcare, who can work in hospitality industries. Those are also the sectors where we need workers. And on the one side, we have the situation where we have the lowest unemployment rate in 50 years. This economy is creating more jobs than people are here to take them. So this is a situation where, sector after sector, industry after industry is asking for workers. We need to have something more substantial.
On that note, I just want to start talking with Bethany, who's going to be doing something different from working on these really big policy issues. You're actually going to go down to the border.
I am.
Which, as I said before, is something that I admire. As I told you, I'm taking a luxurious vacation for the winter, and you're going to take on this really challenging job. What made you decide to do that?
Yeah, well, I'm very much interested in legal systems, especially how vulnerable and marginalized populations navigate different institutions. So primarily the criminal legal system, but also the immigration system. And I have a bit of a background in policy. I worked in D.C. on Capitol Hill for a little while, and I did some work. You might remember the comprehensive immigration reform. I think it was the Gang of Eight of 2013. So I was working for Senator Merkley at that time from Oregon, and I was working on that, on following that issue very closely and sort of attending briefings and hearings and all of that stuff. So I really got an introduction to immigration and that system in my work doing policy.
So why? But now you're going to go to the
Yeah.
front lines. I mean, you're not going to go back to Washington
No,
for vacation.
I'm not.
You're going to the front lines.
Yeah, but I'm studying forensic social work. It's something that I've been learning a lot about. And so my field placement last year, for example, I worked for Queens Legal Services, working with women who are...
So what are you going to do? Are you going to go cross the border and...
Yes.
You're going to go...
So I'm going to San Diego.
Yeah.
I'll get
Where the
trained while
action
I'm
is.
there.
Where the action is.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then I will go to Tijuana, and I will spend time there working in the Pro Se legal clinic. So I'll be helping and supporting migrants prepare to present themselves before the Customs and Border Patrol.
Can you just make that a little bit more concrete? So you're going to be in Tijuana, and there's a clinic that's in a storefront or something like that.
Something like that.
And people are going to come in, and they're going to say, I'm trying to get to the United States. So what are you going to do to help them?
Yeah, well, I haven't been yet, so it's a little bit uncertain
Well, what do you think
exactly
you're
what I'll
going
be
to do?
doing.
Yeah.
But what I imagine that I'll be doing is working with people as they come in. I know a lot of the migrants and people who are on the caravan have been prepared. They have some documentations or photo evidence so they can present their credible fear claim. So I think I'll be working with them to sort of sort through whatever paperwork that they might have. There'll be a volunteer team of attorneys, immigration attorneys, who will be providing more technical support. But, at the foundation of the work that I'm going to be doing there is going to be standing in solidarity with these people as they are going through this incredible journey and trying to make it to the United States.
I'd like to come back to that. I think that's interesting. But there, as I understand it, really two steps for the people who are now in Mexico. One is getting into the United States to make their asylum claim.
Yes.
In which case there's something that happens over a period of time. And the second is hopefully succeeding at the asylum claim. So I'm guessing that you're going to be working on both parts of that.
Absolutely, yeah. So this is really a long-term initiative. So there's, short-term, it's going to the border, helping people with the sort of legal, technical issues, standing in solidarity, things like that. But the long-term goal is also to make sure that once they go to the state or the city that they're looking to go within the United States, that they're also supported. So one of the interesting roles about social workers is we can sort of do more clinical work from both at the border and also from here in New York, or people who might be home in Oregon or wherever else.
So is there a kind of cross-border organization that will help them, as you're going to help them in Tijuana, but if they manage to get into the United States and they're bringing a claim for asylum, there'll be an organization here to help them? What's the organization?
So I'm volunteering with New Sanctuary Coalition. They have this new arm called the Sanctuary Caravan. And so they're coordinating a lot of volunteers from across the United States to go down to the border, but also to organize from home. So part of that organizing from home is to receive folks once they get in, like I mentioned before, once they sort of settle in the state or the city that they're looking to go, to receive them and help them sort of establish roots and supply them sort of long-term
So
supports.
aside from going to Tijuana, which is what you're doing, what could a social work student or a member of our social work community do to help with this effort?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's some really great resources that I would recommend folks go to if you're interested. Sanctuarycoalition.org. They have a lot of
Let's say that slowly.
Oh, sorry. Sanctuarycoalition.org. I think I'll at some point also post in the comments of the Facebook page links to the resources. But folks can go there and they can fill out a form. And the form has, like, you can designate if you want to go to the border, if you want to help from home, if you want to donate money. So any way that you want to support, if you go there, there'll be a way where you can indicate that and somebody will get in touch with you.
So you can either volunteer to do some work or you can give money.
Or you can give money. Yeah, absolutely.
So
Or
I
you can
always like to
organize.
emphasize to people
Yeah.
like myself who take luxury vacations instead of going to
Yes.
the border to help, we can give money.
Absolutely.
And even
Yeah.
social work students can give money.
Yeah,
Yes.
and we can also organize from home too. That's a really important piece. Organizing our families and our friends once we're home, especially over winter break, to help make sure that folks have some community supports as well.
And so by going to the website, let's give the name again.
Sanctuarycaravan.org.
By going there, you can sign up and find out various things you can do and give some money besides.
Absolutely.
I just want to go back to something you said before, that in addition to helping people with their legal problems, that you can give them some kind of, I forget what you said, social support, emotional support.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense of that? I know you haven't been there yet.
You know, I don't really have a sense of exactly what that would look like, but I do know from the trainings that I've participated in, standing in solidarity with somebody doesn't have to be a verbal sort of major action. It's literally just sort of standing with them and walking with them as they're getting ready to present themselves before Customs and Border Patrol. So I'm sure, as you can imagine, that can be a very emotional, difficult process. These folks have already been through incredible ordeals. They're fleeing their homes from all kinds of different situations. So somebody who is sort of walking with them and standing with them, I think, can be a very strong sort of support of, or show of, like, supportive counseling, even if you're not necessarily having a conversation. Yeah.
So that there are things that can be done to provide emotional support. And as you say, I mean, this must be a wrenching experience for people. Don't you
I'd
think? Just
imagine.
terrible. I know I have some experience in disaster work, and one of the things that we have pushed over the years that I was involved in that was to do the emotional work, or the clinical work as it might be called, in the context of the concrete service. And if you ask people to go from your clinic, the legal clinic, down the street to a mental health clinic, they're not going. But if you can move those kinds of services into that context, stand with them, listen to them, provide certain kinds of supports,
Absolutely.
it can really have an impact. We have a question.
Yes.
Okay, the question is, as you can see, what compelled you to volunteer in that specific area?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of a lot of the work that I've been doing since I've been in high school, really. I've worked a lot with young folks who were migrant farm workers, for example. I did the immigration policy work when I was on the Hill. I worked with, last year in my field placement, I worked with a woman who was a domestic violence survivor who was also undocumented, and I worked with her to get her VAWA self-petition. So I'm really, like, interested in, like, seeing what it's like for people navigating these systems of oppression, like what these systems are like, what they do. And I think it's really important for us to really understand these systems and shine light on how they operate, how people are oppressed by them, in order to work towards eventually dismantling them and reforming them and working for change. So I'm really motivated by the folks I work with.
So part of your interest is the human part of this, the face-to-face part of
Absolutely.
this, but part of it is also moving towards various kinds of policy changes
Yes.
that would make a difference. And Neeraj, you were talking earlier about the kinds of changes in policies that would be useful. One of the things that's striking here is that you're going to be working on helping people seeking asylum, and Neeraj, you're saying that currently, at least, only 20% of them are going to win that. And 80% of them are going to have a problem, and maybe we should have some other policy changes as well.
Well, maybe the actual number would be less now, because you see they're only allowing a processing of 100 applications a day. And most of those applications, the fact that we had border control go there, is basically that the president's directive is very clear that they don't want the migrants to enter. So I think
20% is an overestimate.
Yes, because 20%, the number that I gave was of several previous years. We have reduced the number of refugees quota for this year. It's been the lowest since the time the system was created, since 1980. So our policy is increasingly anti-refugees, anti-asylum seekers. Therefore, and the other reason why I think we need to think of a long-term solution is that people who are in the caravan, the migrant groups, they have a long, arduous journey. It's not an easy trip that they make for some people it take a month of, walking all the way, taking various ways of transportation. It's a difficult journey. At the end of the journey, there is no hope. At the end of the journey, if those who try to become successful is those who are not able to get asylum, they fall into the clutches of coyotes. It's become riskier. Some of them are able to enter the country illegally. I think we need to change the policy and see, as I said, the number is very small compared to the number that we get.
Well, let's get specific about how to change the policy. And you've got a background in Washington where you worked on one of the compromise formulations. So what are the elements? You said the quota is too low.
We need to create more visas, and that's not for the migrant. We need to create it for our economy. I really believe we'll make changes only because we think they're good for us.
Okay.
So therefore, we need to see that we have this sector after sector, industry after industry across the country showing labor shortages. How do you address that? How did we address this in the past? We had Mexico in our border. They were sending a lot of undocumented immigrants. They were coming without inspections of their papers. And during the 1990s, the last big economic boom that we have, every year the country was receiving close to 400 to 500,000 undocumented immigrants. The thing about undocumented immigrants that we never see who goes back. There's a kind of circular migration going on. People come here, work, and they go back. And now Mexico, for whatever reason, one of them is demographic, the other is their own economic conditions are better, and the third one is the xenophobia and racism that Mexican migrants have received in the United States, that they don't want to come here.
We have about 7 minutes left.
Okay.
So why don't we just try to tick off the elements of a more intelligent immigration policy than we have now. So one part of that has to do with the numbers of people who are allowed to come into the country and facilitating that in some way. So you can raise the quota and raise the number of visas, but if you don't have the workforce to do that in our embassies and consulates and so forth, so that would be another dimension of it, I would think, actually having the capacity to implement that. What else comes to mind as a major change in policy that would make sense? I look at both of you.
Sure.
Jump in.
Well, I know, Professor, you mentioned earlier that about 100 people a day were getting processed, but when I heard most recently, it's more like 20 people a day are getting able to come to the border and present their asylum claim. So I think those numbers might be like sort of even lower. So that's definitely like some short-term things that we need to do is make sure that people can get into the country and to be seen. And there's been other sort of policies from the administration sort of determining that like you have to enter at specific ports of entry, otherwise you can't seek asylum, but we know that's contrary to lots of domestic and international laws as well.
So quickly, let me pursue a somewhat different line of thought. What's keeping this from happening? It seems to me that intelligent immigration policy is pretty obvious, but that's obviously not obvious to, that's a lot of obvious, but it's obviously not obvious to the world of politics. What's going on? What's stopping this?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know if the answer is obvious. From my understanding, I'm not sure why it's so low. I mean, I can speculate as to what sort of intentions and motivations might be for processing so few people, but I'm not certain.
So I think I would go back to the same thing. It's a small number compared to the number that gets in. We don't have to be overwhelmed with it.
You've persuaded me.
Yes.
So how are you going to persuade, I don't know, John Doe in the Senate that he or she should be supporting a change in immigration policy?
I think the pressure will come from industry, from economy. Yeah. And in the past, research shows that when the economy is booming, border control actually becomes lax. We have not seen that happening now. The other policy that I would say that we've had a history of, accepting a lot of refugees, and I think on humanitarian grounds, when all over the world, all kinds of people are going through all kinds of humanitarian crisis. I think that number, we shouldn't be so small-minded. We should open our borders to them. We should have the checking of their papers and other things that we do, but we should increase that number.
So is there any way that you have to try to persuade them, the people who have to vote for this? I read recently that there's widespread support for the DACA, if I'm saying that right, the undocumented, the kids who came here that weren't born here, and everybody thinks they should be allowed to stay, and we can't get a vote on that. So, and the analysis that was given there was, well, everybody favors it, but they're not going to vote on it when they vote for a candidate. So if they have a candidate who doesn't care much about the fate of these people, that doesn't matter too much to most voters. There's something that has to happen here to change the politics, and I think that we exist in a world now, and not just the United States. I think if we look at what's happening in Italy, if we look at what's happening in France, I don't know what's happening in Japan. You mentioned Japan earlier, which is opening its doors. Sweden, there was almost a political revolt that took place, all because people are afraid of this change in the balance of the population. And it seems to me we need to address that. I'm supposed to interview and not give a speech, but
well, yeah.
What do you
so
think?
That's something that that's something that led me to write this book, because I was really concerned about what's going on in country after country where people are getting so upset, disenchanted. And through my research, I actually find it's not the volume and the size of immigrants in these countries that is leading to all this disenchantment or fear about immigrants. It's some other fundamental core problems that the countries are unable to address. So it's easy to blame the foreigner, and which is what I think is happening. Instead of addressing your own problems, we need to address the core social, economic, and political problems. And blaming
so we'll
on
have to
immigrants
come
won't
back
help.
and do that another time because we're down to about 30 seconds. There's a quick question for Bethany. Any advice that you can give the migrants who can't get asylum?
Oh, that's a really good question. You know, I'm wondering, I might have more advice after I spend some time in Tijuana and get a better sense of sort of what that's like.
So this is our last show for this semester.
Yes.
But we will be back next semester, we think, and perhaps both of you can come back again. You can tell us about your experience and how you ended up answering that question for what will probably be more than 80% of the people who you deal with who won't be able to get asylum. Be very interesting to know about that, and we can pursue your sense that there's something fundamentally wrong with a country which is not doing what's intelligent, which is inviting in the immigrants that we need to support the economy of the country. So we have much more to talk about. I want to thank people for tuning in today, and we hope that you will come back and tune in again next semester. We're not entirely sure of what the date or time will be, but we will get information out there about that. And in the meantime, we hope you enjoy your holidays and have a happy new year. And again, we hope you'll join us again next semester. Thank you to our guests.
Thank you. Thanks for watching.